Did she get in okay?
She was just in, but I guess she just left. So I'm not so sure. I'm texting her to figure it out.
Okay. I'm just gonna chill in here until the time.
Okay, bet. I we can
Hey,
hear you.
So I'm sitting outside with my headphones in, but they're mowing the grass across the street.
Okay, Matt.
your connection's better?
I hope so. Like, am I like glitching or anything?
Nah, you're good.
Awesome. Thank you. Enemies. I hate Zooms.
I kind of like this in lieu of class, so I don't have to like get up for a little bit.
That's kind of like the only reason I wish I was living on campus. Like 30 minutes away. I have a class immediately after this. It's not fun.
Oh, damn. Yeah. I have a class with her right after this class too. So usually I just like chill after class, but dang, 30 minutes?
Like going down Monument. Which is not bad. It like could be worse.
Oh, you live on the West End?
I live in Glen Allen.
Oh, okay. Yeah. On campus housing is impossible to find anyways.
Parents were like, "Are you sure you don't want to live on campus?" I was like, "It's so expensive," and like I live here already, basically.
Yeah, the commute's not too bad. I feel like you save more than just paying
A
gas instead
hundred
of
percent. Like
working.
I'm only paying like gas every like 2 weeks, and I get paid like around the same time I get gas, and I'm
Only
only
every
gonna
two
be
weeks?
uh about yeah, because like what am I driving? I'm driving a Kia Soul. It's like 15 gallons, I think, 13 maybe. So it's like $34 every time I get gas.
Every 2 weeks, though? I feel like I get gas every week and I live like
Yeah.
5 minutes from campus.
I also like I have to go to my work. I have to go here. Like I have to drive people around sometimes. It's a mess. But you know what?
I hope
I'm
you
only
get
making
gas money
like
from them.
I know, yeah. They're like, do you have gas money? Yes.
That would be very much appreciated. Sorry, we're just waiting on Connor, right? Okay.
Do we have everyone? I think it's just the five of us, right?
Yep.
And two
Yeah. I think, yeah, if Emma's connection is still working.
Okay. Emma,
Emma,
can
can
you
you?
hear us?
Sorry, I kept getting kicked out of the meeting.
You're good. Okay. So, first question. The podcast mentions a number of misperceptions that people tend to hold when they think about Washington, D.C. What are some of those misperceptions, and why do the people featured in the podcast think that those misunderstandings negatively impact their fight for statehood? Um, to answer the first question, I remember one common misperception was that they weren't responsible enough to like run their own state, which I think had a lot of racist undertones, quite honestly. And it negatively impacts them because, like, I mean, you pretty much, I guess, the people opposing this, like the Republicans, they pretty much have power over that, just completely denying them of statehood, not letting it go through Senate, the House, whatever. So they really don't even have a say either because they can't vote for somebody to get a seat to vote for them. So,
Yeah, I also read, I think he was talking to someone in Iowa who confused that everyone in DC was a politician and there wasn't like actually like a city there. And I think that also plays a role in it because people just assume DC is just this big political, like there's nothing else happening there, and the general anti-government sentiment will just kind of tamper down any statehood efforts for DC.
Yeah, I think like you're talking about like because it was also mentioned in episode one as well, where a lot of people think that DC is just made up of like bureaucrats and like lobbyists and things like that. And so I think it negatively impacts people being or just granting DC statehood because it paints a picture of like DC is just, they're all bureaucrats, they're not like us, they're not like, the rest of America, which is I always find that argument kind of annoying because like even if you work for the federal government, you still are an American citizen and you deserve voting rights. But um anyway.
yeah, I thought it was kind of bizarre because, like, did they think DC was just like this town that housed all of these government officials? Like, I didn't understand that or the logic behind it.
You guys
Uh,
ready to move on to the next one?
yeah, Emma's trying to connect.
If she wants, she can just there's two Emma. There's three Emmas.
Yeah. Did you want to say anything about that question? We
We
can't
can't hear
hear.
you. Do you want Emma, do you want just to call me? I can put you on speaker on my phone. Okay. Do you have my number? Me. I'm not sure if you heard me, so I put it in the group me, but while we're waiting, do you guys want to move on to the next question?
Yeah.
Hold on, wait, Emma's calling me now. Can you hear me, Emma? Yeah, there we go.
Really awesome. Thank you so much.
Hold on. There's a lot of feedback. Can you? I'll let you guys talk while I figure that.
Okay. All right. When you did think about Washington, D.C., did you operate under any of the misperceptions that are discussed in this podcast? Um, I said no because like I grew up near DC, so I didn't really think that these people were like too irresponsible or like it was just government officials up there. Um, but I've always known it to be a predominantly black city. And with that, even though it's not anymore, like I think the percentage is like I think white people is 46.2% and black is 45% now. So I feel like they just still have this misperception that it's predominantly black, and that's really what's kind of like pushing most of their arguments. And then people of color definitely tend to vote more Democratic. So obviously they think it's a vote for the Dems and everything. So I didn't really operate under these misconceptions because I think they're quite silly. But yeah.
I kind of had like the opposite. Like I grew up like 30 minutes outside of DC, and I feel like I was just kind of naive to um how many people actually like live there and that was their full-time residence. So that was kind of the only misperception that I fell under, I guess, is that I just didn't realize how populated it was and how much people were affected by not having that representation in DC. So
All right, Emma's speaking through me.
So I kind of said in episode 1, what is it, minute 129, that a lot of people like work for the government there, and that sounds like a like pretty common misconception. And I kind of had that misconception as well, but I knew a lot of people from DC, and like I just at the same time, I don't know. I feel like it's too small to be a state if it does get statehood. Like I would like them to have the same rights as people who live in states, because like Rhode Island's like 100,000, not 100,000, 1,000 square miles ish, and DC is only like 68 square miles ish. So like I feel like that misconception is kind of perpetuated by how small it is, you know?
I definitely agree, but I feel like, well, I know they have more population than like Vermont and Wyoming. So I feel like
This is
the
true. Yeah.
size doesn't really matter too much because, like, I mean, the density of all those people in that area, I feel like that should push more towards statehood because of that, all the people there. And Wyoming's a big state. So
Yeah, I'll say the one kind of misconception I have, not misconception, but like, because it didn't lead me to think that DC shouldn't be a state, but like for a while, like kind of fell into the whole DC is just made up of like, lobbyists and bureaucrats and government workers, mainly just because like that's how it is always portrayed in not only like the media, but like different movies and TV shows. Like you don't typically see a lot of um, like non-government workers portrayed as DC residents. And so I kind of, I guess, fell for that. But at the same time, it didn't really make me believe that um, just because they of their profession, they should be denied voting rights. But
yeah, if
and
anything, I
also,
feel
can you guys hear Emma okay, by the way? I want to make sure Dr. Reckendorf is able to hear on the recording. Okay.
yeah. I was gonna say I feel like if anything, government workers should be able to vote anyways if that is an argument because like they're working for the government. So why would they not have a say in the government? But I don't know.
Right. Anyone else want to add on, or are we good to move on to the next one? All right. How much had you thought about let me rephrase. Let me start over. How much thought had you given to the issue of DC statehood before listening to the podcast? How do you think you'd feel if you were a resident of DC?
You can start, Connor, if you want to.
Right. So I actually thought like quite a bit about it just because of like I think it's always been an issue, but more so in the last like 4 or 5 years, I feel like it's been become more and more prominent, especially with Democrats taking over the control of the House and the Senate, and also having the White House under their control. And it was one of the many things that was kind of torpedoed by Joe Manchin, Kirsten Sinema in the Senate. Um, and so I remember hearing a lot about it then. And also there was some not to get too partisan, but there was some argument on the Democratic side of, if the Republicans don't want to play by the rules and they want to kind of go, super aggressive, then Democrats should do the same thing by adding DC, Puerto Rico, Guam, and other territories as states. So basically, it would like, codify their advantage in the House and Senate for, however many years. And so I definitely like heard a lot about it. I think as a DC resident, I would feel the same way I feel now as, DC should be a state, or at least at the very least be given, representation, both the House and Senate. Representation is important to me, and I can't imagine not having that. So,
Yeah. Um, Before I didn't really give it too much thought. Like I always seen like the license plates, taxation without representation or no taxation without representation. So I always knew it was a fight, and like my dad's really into politics, so he'd always talk to me about that, especially because we were so close to it. But I mean, after these podcasts, like I'm thinking about going on the front lines and protesting at this point because this is actually crazy. And then for the territories too, like the fact that the American Samoa doesn't even have citizenship, like that's literally absolutely insane. Like I did not know that. So yeah, I think as a DC resident, of course, I'd feel even more like uncomfortable living in a city where I know that like I don't have the same rights as if I drive 30 minutes south or 30 minutes north. So it's crazy.
Emma had something to say, I believe, via phone.
I completely agree with you about the American Samoa thing. I thought that was so wild. Like, how are you gonna slap your name on something and then like not give them the rights of like the citizens? I didn't actually know that Puerto Rico had like citizenship. So that kind of like boggled my mind even more. I'd be very upset and frustrated like every single day if I was a DC resident. But I kind of only thought about the issue of DC statehood around election time because that's the only time it was really relevant for me. But I feel like if that was my life every day, it'd be a lot different.
Right, you guys ready?
I
Go ahead, sorry.
sorry. Um, I was just gonna say I like really haven't thought about it, but learning in the podcast like how much backlash there had been and how many times people have tried to get um like things passed and stuff and how quickly it's been shut down, I think is I don't know, I just think it's kind of weird, like why if so many people are trying to fight for this, why it keeps getting shut down so quickly. So that kind of got me thinking more about it. But yeah.
Mm.
You guys ready for the next question? All right. What sorts of arguments were used during the founding era of U.S. history to justify the decision to locate the capital in Washington, D.C., and to create it as a non-state?
I feel like they talked about that mostly in episode 2 with like Hamilton and stuff. And it was just kind of like a clunky decision, and it still impacts us in a very clunky way.
Yeah. What I read was that the founding fathers didn't really want protests near their like Congress and stuff. Think they were protesting for like federal government or something like that. I don't know. I might
It
have
was
read
like
that.
the Philadelphia militia.
Yeah, and they were doing it near the state house, and they're like, no, stop protesting near Congress. So they wanted to move it and give it its own jurisdiction and stuff.
Yeah, I wrote just like technically like the proximity to the Potomac River. And then um I read that it was like they wanted it to be a neutral location so that there wasn't any favoritism in like I guess like laws and such.
Okay. How was the decision to create DC? Wait, sorry. Wait, is that the next one? Yeah. How is
Yeah.
the decision to create DC as a non-state impacted the people living in the city, both historically and in more and or current politics? Use specific examples of real-world events and or policy to highlight the impact that this decision has on residents of DC. Ethan, did you want to?
Yeah. I'm sorry about the other two. It's just I didn't really have any more to add. But yeah. The first off is the budget. They have to ask Congress to always approve their budget, and then other administrative actions like the prison system. I think I forgot which podcast episode was it, but how he committed a crime in D.C. Then he got moved all the way to North Carolina, which it just seems like a mess that can be easily fixed by just granting them more autonomy or giving them statehood, and obviously the representation issue.
Fun fact about that, I think they used to send like the DC residents to the Lorton State Prison, like the maximum facility, whatever I think. But they closed it and they turned it into like houses. So
Oh,
yeah.
That's
Um,
gentrification on a whole other level.
yeah.
Huh?
One of the things. Sorry, go ahead, Emma.
Oh, I was saying that's like gentrification on a whole nother level.
Yeah, and it happened right down the street
Reverse
from my
gentrification.
house. But I think
Um,
they shut it down for like, I think something was going wrong with the prison or something.
Probably.
I put in here, and we kind of touched on it, but like the fact that Congress can just veto what DC wants in terms of like legislation, not even like budgetary stuff, but just straight up like legislation. And the episode I did, or the like example I gave was in episode 5. Despite 70% of residents in DC voting to legalize medical marijuana, Congress decided to prevent them from doing that. Which is just kind of crazy to me that you have like a constituency that, or not even a constituency because they don't have representation, but a local government who has 75% of their citizens saying they want something, and then the government just coming in and saying no. That's wild to me. And it just blows my mind. Um, that, and also in episode 1, they talk a little bit about the COVID-19 pandemic and how because DC is not a state, they got significantly less funding and resources during the pandemic, which led to bad outcomes.
I
Yeah.
think that was episode 1, minute 14. Yeah, because they're talking about how who was it? Her name's Norton.
Eleanor Holton.
Yeah, she can't vote on any bill, even if she introduces it. And I thought that was like insane. It's like, how are you going to give them representation and then not let them represent?
But wasn't it even? It's even weirder than that too, because can't she vote in committee but then not on the floor? Which like
Yep.
doesn't make sense.
Yeah. And then the fact that like Mayor Bowser has pretty much no control over her own city either, which is crazy. Like she had to request the National Guard to help her, which is actually ridiculous. But
I think the outward racism was kind of interesting. Like they're like, would you even trust someone like Mayor Bowser to be your governor?
personally,
It was really wild.
I'm not a fan of Mayor Bowser. I think he's an absolute psychopath. But I mean, she has done some good stuff for DC. I'm not saying all of her policies are great, but I feel like as a Black person, I feel like it's just from racism that they don't want her to be the governor as well. Like, I mean, DC residents keep voting her in for whatever odd reason, even though they don't like her either. But yeah, I feel like if maybe start with Mayor Bowser as the governor and then vote somebody else in. And I feel like more people would also run if there was a governor's seat.
And the governor's seat actually held power, because I think that's part of problem possibly too is, she's the mayor of DC, but there's not much like she has to request for the National Guard. She can't like really there's not much she can do like as mayor. And so I think it disinterests people from running for stuff like that.
Yeah, for sure. That's why nobody runs. But we can get
Are you guys ready to move on?
yeah.
All right. One of the things that can make debating DC statehood fraught with conflict are the assumptions that each side makes about the motives of the people who disagree with them. For example, the podcast discusses the Republican assertion that Democrats support DC or force DC statehood is merely a power grab, not a principled stand. What do you make of that assertion?
After all, like the stories I've heard from actual DC residents, it's definitely a principal stand. Like, I don't think it's a power grab at all. They just want basic rights, voting rights. They want a government that'll actually represent what they want. And like the thing with the district attorney, how like all the like hate crime went down like by a lot when the president appointed that district attorney because he just didn't want to look at them like the crimes or just like convict them or nothing. So I thought that was crazy too. But yeah, I just feel like um oh, I just lost my train of thought. Yeah, but pretty much I think it's a principled stand. They just want representation. That's literally it. And I feel like
I
that's not
thought
asking for much.
it's not asking for much at all. And I thought the assertion was a little ridiculous. Um, can y'all hear me? Sorry, my like audio cut out for a second.
Yeah.
I thought it was a little ridiculous because like it just sounds like all the finger pointing and paranoia that Gillette was talking about, and it's kind of ridiculous. Yeah, that's about it.
So I like I don't know, I kind of go back and forth because like I do think there is some like validity to like part of the reason why Democrats want DC and other territories to become a state is because they know with some degree of certainty that if that happens, then the senators and representatives from DC and from those territories are most likely going to be Democrats. But at the same time, I think there are political consequences to every decision that our country makes, whether we like to admit it or not. And I give more weight to not disenfranchising citizens more so than the political consequences. Because even if there is political consequences, that isn't necessarily the main reason why we should do something or not do something for that matter. But I definitely think there is some argument to be made that it is political.
I feel like there's no decision that isn't going to be political at this point. I feel like a lot of places will surprise you, especially with the territories. Remember with like the 2000 election, a lot of Cubans turned Republican and are still pretty Republican today. But like in my mind, they would have been a pretty Democratic group. I feel like no matter where you go, there's going to be a healthy mix of like Democrats and Republicans. And like if you look at one of the later questions, they ask like, do you think it's like a partisan thing, the DC statehood? And I said that I didn't really think of it as a partisan thing because no matter who I ask, they're just like kind of think of it as a moral issue rather than a political issue.
That's exactly what I said.
Yeah.
But honestly, I'm gonna not disagree with you with the Cuban thing just because I know a lot of immigrants they come to America like thinking about this like American dream, like, and their mindset is like if they kind of side with the Republicans and like vote Republican, like their money will come in type of thing, or they won't get taxed as much, whatever. So I feel like the Cubans were just bound to be Republican eventually, because I know a lot of immigrants and a lot of Southern people are very Republican. But it also ties, like for the Southern people, it ties into like Christian ideals as well, which is kind of sick that you have like your religion tied to your politics, but whatever.
Right.
Anna or Ethan, do you have anything else you want to add?
Yeah. I was gonna say that like the actual people who are like not in government, I would say have more of an authentic and view of it, like wanting representation. But I feel like there's a handful or a large chunk of Democrats in Congress who definitely see it as a way to expand their power. I would say because I think the first time this came up was in the 1990s, and it got voted down pretty heavily. And since we do have like a lot of old politicians, there's a lot of them who voted on that first one, who voted on the second one. So I definitely want to see like how many Democrats voted or changed their votes from not supporting it to now supporting it. Because I think when the first vote came up, Democrats still held control of Congress like pretty easily back in the day. But now that there's some difficulties, and I think that it's a good way to look at it.
Yeah, I basically wrote about the Democratic majority that would come about. And I think you guys covered that pretty well, so I don't want to parrot, but
Okay.
What one thing, if I can just add one last thing, I think also going back to like, is it political, is it not political? I think if we go back to episode 4, when Eleanor Norms Holton was teaming up with a Republican from Utah, that basically said, it would give, a DC a voting seat in the House, and they would add an extra one for Utah since they apparently thought they got the bad end of the or bad deal with the redistricting in the previous redistricting process, and they lost a seat. So she was teaming up with a Republican, and and I think in some way acknowledging that there is a concern that if a Democrat gets a seat, like it's going to out. But I don't know what I'm exactly trying to say, but like there seems to be like some acknowledgement of the fact that like Democrats are going to gain power if DC becomes a state, and I think Eleanor Norms Holton kind of acknowledges that to some degree.
She
But
definitely handled it with a bit of grace, because I feel like a lot of Democrats would be scared to even acknowledge it and don't want to admit defeat. But that's a part of compromise. It's part of bipartisanship that we've lost. And I think, acknowledging like that either side is like doing 100% well. In this case, like it wouldn't hurt. It wouldn't hurt them really.
Yeah, I feel like even though they are gonna get some more seats, like the Republicans and the Democrats, they already both gerrymander, so just keep doing what you're doing at that point. So,
Right.
yeah.
all right. A similar example in the podcast is Democrats' own assertion that Republican opposition to DC statehood is a racist attempt to maintain their political advantage. What do you make of that assertion? Y'all already know how I feel. I think everything that they're saying is racist, but y'all can go.
I mean, we kind of talked about it. It is a little racist, but there is some validity to what Connor is saying about them definitely being a little afraid of the Democrat control. And there's like some validity to the Democrat control, but they were outwardly racist during some of those episodes, and it's kind of hard to ignore, and it makes them makes it harder to agree with them on any sort of stance on DC statehood when they bring kind of race into it instead of just the politics.
Well, even though them fearing Democratic control, I think this is just my hot take. I think them fearing the Democrats are going to take over if DC and these territories get added, that in and of itself is racist, because who are they thinking about when Democrats take over? They're thinking of people of color who, these BLM protests, like that's who they're at least pitching to their base of, these are the scary Democrats who are going to take over. So even by not mentioning race, but saying that they're afraid Democrats are going to take over, that in and of itself, I feel like is racist to a certain degree.
I also feel like going back to the whole responsibility thing, it's kind of like an infantilization of the residents of DC. Like, I don't know. Like, I feel like the use of that word specifically is just like, we can't trust them because they're black, pretty much. But yeah, like and especially because DC does have the nickname of Chocolate City. So I just feel like they're kind of infantilizing the DC residents when they're saying that as well.
Chocolate City was crazy. Every single time it got brought up, I was like, that is just so wild to me.
I mean, it is Chocolate City.
Yeah.
Ethan or Anna, anything?
Um,
No, I think I'm all good.
talk to some friends and family about this debate. Based on what you hear, is the assumption that the issue breaks down neatly across partisan lines. An oversimplification of does it seem to accurately reflect attitudes on the topic of DC statehood? Were there any additional points made when talking to other people about the topic that the podcast didn't touch on? Um, I talked to my dad. He pretty much has the same arguments as the podcast. I think everybody does. Like, just give them voting rights, give them their own government, stuff like that. But it was pretty much like Emma said, mostly just a moral thing, not really political at all. Like, I feel like the people that are really only thinking about it, well, I can't say that because I feel like the Democrats know that they're going to have that power. But also, like, the people that are emphasizing the whole political issue is the Republicans.
I mostly talked to my dad about it, and his biggest thing was the voting issue of just like yeah, then only being able to vote for president and then the representatives not having a say like in anything was something that he seemed pretty passionate about because he's pretty into politics and um does advertising and is working on the election this year. So um that is like on the top of his mind recently. And so the voting issue was um his biggest thing, and then also seemed to be one of the biggest things when I talked about it with some friends of mine too. So
Yeah, I talked to my mom, sister, and roommates about this, and it was a little difficult because some of them like didn't even know this was an issue. And I said never even thought about it or heard about it in like, like the media and stuff like that. Um, but the people who kind of knew about it, they kind of more so thought of it as, oh, Democrats want DC to become a state because it gives them power. Republicans, don't for the opposite reasons. Which I thought was kind of interesting, especially because they didn't even go into the whole history of like, everything we learned in this podcast. Um, my sister kind of reinforced a point though in the podcast that I thought was kind of funny. She said it's ironic that DC, that's the capital of, the quote unquote the democracy, being the United States, that citizens in DC were being disenfranchised. So I thought it kind of just, summed up the podcast and the whole issue very well.
I feel like there was a lot of unnecessary stuff in the podcast. Like we kind of said in the group me, like it went on a little too long. Like it kind of talked on issues that like, yeah, it's interesting to learn about like the cannabis issue, but I said like later it was like one of the less compelling arguments for DC statehood. Like the idea of political autonomy would have been like a great thing to like touch on. I feel like the cannabis thing, like it totally drove the point home, but it just like there's more important things to focus on than weed. But I think it's good. They could have like talked about other legislation that had been shot down by Congress. But yeah.
Yeah, I feel like the fact that they legalized marijuana before getting DC statehood doesn't really help their argument.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, kind of going like Emma, what you kind of said, like the way I viewed it, it wasn't necessarily like the issue of legalizing marijuana itself. It was more so that going back to what I said earlier about 70% of citizens saying they wanted this to happen in their locality, and Congress
Mhm.
kind of coming and rejecting it. I think that was the overall point of like if there's an overwhelming majority of DC wants to do something, Congress can simply come in and say no, go, you can't do
I
that.
feel like
That was kind of I think the main point they were
I
making.
100% agree with you. I 100% agree with you on that point because like I wanted them to focus more on that issue, but I feel like the entire episode was like kind of marijuana. I feel like they could have talked about maybe other legislation that we didn't know about. I feel like that's an issue that happens in a lot of states. It just is a little more special to DC because of the fact that they don't have any political autonomy.
Yeah, they did also mention like, Congress trying to get rid of their gun laws, and they added a rider to a spending bill that would get rid of, or would prevent DC from spending money on abortion care, things like that. But I think they were mainly using like the marijuana issue as like an example of, or a more detailed example of DC not having autonomy, and like voting power.
It definitely makes people want to click on the podcast. So
And
I think that
arguably too, like, like I think they kind of picked an issue that what is really, I mean, especially like, it was made in 2020, 2021. There were several states that year that had, marijuana usage on the ballot, that year and years prior and years since then. And so I think it was kind of just one of the hot button issues that, yeah, anyway. Sorry, a little off topic, but
no, you're good. Don't worry.
Ethan, yeah, Ethan and Anna.
Yeah, no, I agree. I felt like some of it was just like repetitive. Like I was just like, we've been over this, and I felt like it was just drawing it out, like the main point. But yeah, but to get back to the question, I did talk to my more liberal and conservative friends to see like where each of them land. The liberal ones were more on the like, oh, we need to give them more representation, statehood, stuff like that. And the more conservative friends were much more on the fence about it. When I tried to ask them, their biggest like hiccup was the fact that Democrats would gain more power, which I tried to uh, get them out, but that was their just biggest hiccup about the whole thing.
All right. So I think Anna, anything else, or are you ready to move on? Okay. Overall, what arguments in the podcast did you find most compelling in favor of DC statehood, or least compelling in opposition to DC statehood?
One we
Anna,
haven't touched on. No, go ahead, Kiana.
I was gonna say, Anna, did you want to start?
Yeah, I can. I think something that I didn't know was that DC didn't have its own prison system. And so hearing that, I think Jamie Gray was the man's name, talking about his experience being so far away from his family while he was in jail and missing out on so much. I think he said he didn't see his mom for like 10 years or something. So I think the city would benefit from, well, if it became a state, it would benefit from that prison system. And then I think I remember hearing in the podcast, I can't remember which episode it was, but there was an argument saying like, well, they wouldn't need the prison system if they just addressed the issues that were like causing the crime, I guess.
Yeah.
So I don't think that was a very compelling argument, but yeah, that was mostly what I wrote about.
Yeah. I agree with you with the prison system. Also, I feel like most prisons are privately owned anyways. So like I feel like that's a money grab for a lot of capitalists anyways to have DC in their own prison or prison system. I wouldn't know where they
I
build it, but yeah.
I thought an issue we hadn't talked about like a lot so far was an episode for 9 minutes and 50 seconds, and it's talking about how violence and racism was argued for almost every state admitted to the union in recent history. So the prejudice against DC being like something that couldn't handle its own politics like shouldn't stand. It's just kind of ridiculous because like every state had kind of a bloody beginning, in my opinion. So if they think that like there's too much crime, there's too much chaos and corruption, I mean, look at any state. I feel like I went to DC enough when I was younger and like in recent years. It kind of blurred together with Virginia. It's a very different place, but like it's honestly not too different from Richmond in a way. Other than the fact they have like a metro, an actual reliable public transit, it's just like it's another metropolitan area. So give them the rights.
Yeah, the just overall, just the administrative systems, the budget, the prison system. I felt like uh, having this local government not being able to handle simple government tasks and always taking that away from them would be, I think, the greatest argument for that would just give them the power to do these things. And I imagine a lot of the problems will fix themselves when they actually have the tools uh, to themselves and don't have to share it with Congress.
Yeah, I also remember them saying like they were trying to get on what is his name? The governor before Muriel Bowser, I think his name was Barry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
They were trying to get on
Barry
him.
and Barry.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. They were trying to get on him because like I guess he was a drunk or something. But like they brought up in the podcast, like the Illinois governor was a drunk as well or something, a drug addict or something bad. I don't know. So I feel like the fact that I mean, yeah, that state's already established Illinois, but like, or was it Chicago? Mayor of Chicago? I don't remember, but
Yeah.
Oh,
it was something.
I know
But
her
like,
name.
that's an established
Barefoot.
state. I mean, it's gonna happen with any state. Like, politicians are still people. Like, I'm pretty sure they dabble in all types of drugs. I'm pretty sure half of them are coked out when they're on the screen. So, I mean, that's not really a compelling argument at all.
Yeah, kind of going off based on what you were saying, Kiana, like there had been, I think there's three recent Illinois governors who have gone to prison and or been indicted for something. And it was like they were almost like back to back to back. So like if you in that case, Illinois shouldn't be a state anymore. Bless you, Emma. Um
Yeah, and then the literal
Even like that
freaking
too, like, one of Virginia's governors, Bob McDonnell, who I believe is going to be a guest speaker at VCU, um, was sent to prison or at least charged with a crime after he left office for some corruption. I can't remember the exact circumstances, but he that was fairly recent. That was right before um Governor Northam, which was he was elected in 2017. So yeah, it was like a decade ago. And so like if you're gonna say just because there are corrupt politicians and leaders in a government or state or local governments, uh system like that disqualifies them from being a state, we would have no states. There would be
yeah,
it would be the United America. Like there would be no states.
yeah,
And so yeah, I don't find that. Yeah, but one of the issues I put, or one of the more compelling arguments I put in here was an episode 4. They were talking about how it was a civil rights issue because a majority of DC is people of color, and I found it compelling because throughout our nation's history there seems to be this reoccurring theme of preventing not only like Black people but just people of color in general from having voting power, representation, and access to their representatives and to their government. And that's been a constant theme throughout our history. And quite frankly, I would kind of argue that DC might already be a state if it was a majority white city. If it was a bunch of white people out there asking for statehood. So I think that kind of just proves the point that some of this is at least, or a big majority of it's racist.
yeah.
Um,
Also, the whole government, I mean, the whole like not being a state thing, like Donald Trump is facing 91 indictments.
Yeah.
So maybe this wouldn't even be a country if you want to use that argument if he becomes president.
Yes, the country have to be abolished, or
Yeah.
what are you gonna
Yeah.
say, Ethan?
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
The
sorry, I was just making fun of the fact that our states are so fucking huge.
Yeah.
this is just a quick side note, but the whole argument about like I guess people being like unqualified, and that's like a argument against it. The most wild governor election I've ever seen was in 1991 in Louisiana. The Democrat was like this. He's been to prison multiple times, and he got out, and his Republican opponent was David Duke. And it's just like, I have no idea how they can make that argument that if you're
Not
unqualified.
losing your mind over there.
Well, and it's also like, sorry, go ahead. I didn't cut you off.
Oh no, I was fine. I was fine.
Oh, no, I was just saying it's also like just like if we really want to get into the weeds here, okay, let's say DC elects people who are corrupt or whatever argument you want to make about that. Is that still enough justification to then turn around and deny them voting rights? Just because they didn't our country arguably has elected some really interesting people, some of which have committed insurrections. That's still not, I would never go and say that, the people who voted for, less than ideal, elected official should therefore have their voting rights and representation revoked. So it's just a really, really weird argument to me, but.
At that
Yeah.
point, it's a rite of passage. Like, you gotta be corrupt to be a state.
Um,
And I felt like, what's it called? This is going back to one of the other questions. I didn't bring this up, but well, actually no, never mind. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, Anna, do you have anything else before we moved on?
I was
Okay.
gonna say we could probably skip to the last question because we kind of talked about most and least compelling already.
Yeah.
Let me just look real quick. Did you guys already, you said you already talked about all, because I have a few that are different, but we can move on if you guys don't
Oh yeah,
wanna.
go ahead. You could talk about the least compelling.
I've been talking a lot. I would like other people to talk, so I don't want to dominate. But if any of you guys have any like additional ones in there, because we still have, I mean, we have to go to like a little like 10 or 15 minutes more. So
I think the last question's
Um,
pretty loaded.
Yeah, the only thing I talked about, it was kind of covered, was um the opposite, the least compelling thing about that the citizens living in DC are not responsible enough. Like that's just so, I don't even know, like it's not even, it doesn't even have anything to back it up. Like it was just something that it just seems like something that
It's
they were
just
running out of
racist.
reasons. Yeah, it's just racist. Like they were running out of reasons to talk about it, and they just decided that they wanted to be racist and say shit like that. So I don't know. That was just the
I
only
thought it
thing
was
I
funny how one of the misconceptions is the fact that like a lot of government workers live in DC. So why would they be like irresponsible?
That's true.
So, yeah.
But also, like, I'm not gonna lie, I do agree with that. Just like not with like not for the same reasons the Republicans do. Like, I agree with that statement because Muriel Bowser should not be the mayor of DC still. Like, I'm so sorry. They're pretty irresponsible for voting her in constantly, but I will give them the responsibility aspect because they voted in officials such as like Eleanor Holmes Norton. Like, she's a good person for the fight for statehood. So that's a responsible choice. Mary Bowser, absolutely not. But yeah, like she's
They're trapped in a cycle. It's not their fault.
well,
yeah.
they might even
Bowser's
like
fault.
they might honestly like I would be curious. I haven't looked it up, but I'd be curious to see what the voting participation rates are in DC because like you also make an argument if DC was a state where their elected officials actually had power over an authority, maybe the voting rate would be higher and you get different outcomes in some of these elections, including the one for mayor.
That's
Um,
true.
some things I had different we hadn't talked about yet for the second part of that question. Um, an argument that I just found absolutely, ridiculous, was that adding DC would require us to add a star to our flag. And just because like I don't like that is such like you have to really grasp at straws for that argument of like hey we can't grant voting rights and representation to almost a million people because we don't want to add a star like I would have to throw out my flag I had to get a new lapel pin like what the fuck does that matter? I'm sorry I'm cussing retro cusses it's fine but what the fuck does that matter like I don't that's not enough good enough excuse
Personally, I don't even know a lot of people that own American flags. So, I mean, I feel like it's absolutely pointless. honestly, to make that argument when if they wanted an even amount of stars, like make the territories states. Like I feel like there's answers to each argument that's against it, but there's not really any answers to arguments that are for it.
It reminded me a lot because like I was interning for Ralph Northam in 2017 when he was running for governor, and the monuments issue was a huge like topic. And I remember like there was a voter I was talking to about this because they were going into the, well, if Ralph Northam gets elected, he's going to remove all these statues. And so we had a conversation about it, and I almost got her to be like, maybe we should take them down. And then she was like, "Ah, but they're just so pretty." And it's like you're completely missing the goddamn point. Like I don't know, like
Really?
yeah, and that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. It's like the same kind of like,
Pretty
but we have to
ugly
add a star. We can't add DC as because we have to add a star. Like that just I don't know.
Yeah.
The other sorry, real quick, I'll let you fast forward too. But like DC, like there was also an argument in episode 4 that the federal government is providing DC everything. Um, the only way they're able to do that is because DC taxpayers pay taxes. And so I didn't really get that point. And then going back to a little bit of the history of, Congress needing secure like, control over DC for security purposes, like that was kind of talked about in episode 2. I don't see that as a compelling argument either, only because like you can't tell me there's not a way to have some type of like shared power agreement between, the Douglas Commonwealth and the DC area for Congress, where there'd be like, security guarantees and things like that. Like, it works for every other democracy with capitals. I don't see why it couldn't work for us. So anyway.
I think Kiana made a good point about the territories, and I think that can like lead us to the next question. Because I may have like a very controversial opinion about this. I don't think the territories should be territories at all. Like I always thought of them in my head as independent countries on their own. I'm not really entirely educated on this issue, so like you can roast me all you want. But like it's just modern day colonialization, in my opinion. Like, what do we have? Military bases there? Is that why? So like, forget about adding stars to the flag. Like, give them their rights, or like leave them alone.
Yeah. My point with the last question was like, I'm pretty sure I'm all for like Puerto Rico getting their statehood, but I'm pretty sure Puerto Ricans don't want statehood because they want to be their own country anyways.
Right.
So if they want statehood, like I'm all for it. I think you should if you want to stay with America, but I think that they should get their individuality back and become a country because like people already think that it's its own country, even people living in America calling them immigrants, which is absolutely ridiculous. But I mean, I feel like they should fight for their like countryhood. What is that called? Independence.
Independence.
Yeah. Independence. And then let's see. And then yeah, like the similarities with it, like they don't get their own officials, like American Samoa and Guam, all them, they get representatives that or delegates that can't even freaking vote. Like I feel like that's actually pointless. Like because I feel like it's pointless, but also it's not pointless to like where they can get their voice heard, but it's also pointless because like I feel like politicians just wouldn't take them serious anyways because they can't vote. So it's like, why are we listening to what you guys have? You have no say in the vote. But the differences, of course, are like Guam doesn't have citizenship, whatnot, and Puerto Rico. Can they all vote for president?
No.
Oh yeah, see, like DC residents can, and then the territories can't. So it's just like
Yeah. The weird thing is that the territories can vote in the presidential primaries, but they can't vote
Yeah.
in like anything
see,
else.
that makes no sense. It's pointless.
Yeah,
Just sorry, go ahead.
in Guam, I think it said for their like straw polls that they had a higher voter turnout than the US did. So I just thought that was I don't know, like that was interesting, and the fact that they can't even like actually vote. Like,
It definitely goes back to the Republicans having a fear of democratic power grab.
Yeah, and I feel like it's kind of a damned if they don't, damned if they do type of situation. Because like, if they didn't have that voter turnout, they'd probably say something like, "Oh, they don't even vote anyways. Like, what's the point of giving them the vote?" But since they do like vote so much, like that's a democratic power grab.
Going back to the primaries real quick, just as like a interesting thing, the reason they can vote in primaries, it's because like that's a party run process. So I think they can only vote in the Democratic primaries. I'm not sure if they can vote in the Republican primaries, but it's because the DNC establishes the rules for who gets like what states get delegates to their convention. And so they can give like any territory they want, pretty much. But anyway, um, the one similarity I found kind of throughout like the territories and DC is like this, racist undertones and sometimes like outwardly racist uh opinions and like conversations surrounding it, like the Supreme Court case that they talked about in the last week tonight with John Oliver, like that uh territories had alien races that may not be able to understand Anglo-Saxon principles, and that since because of that, the laws of the Constitution, or the laws of the United States and the Constitution don't apply to those territories. That is just plainly racist. And I think a lot of the arguments that are made about, at least in the past and somewhat recently, about DC becoming a state are also racist. And so there is that same racist undertone throughout the entire conversation. Um, but
I think
The
Obama
Anglo-Saxon
did
thing.
that too. I think they said on the podcast that Obama supported that point as well, which was I thought was crazy.
yeah,
as
they
well.
were citing that precedent, or the Supreme Court precedent, in a case or a lawsuit that was brought from, I think it was the residents of Guam or another territory. But yeah, I remember what you're talking about.
Yeah, I'm like, oh God, I don't like Obama either, but let's not get into it. I have a
I
lot to
thought
say about Bowser
the
and Obama.
Anglo-Saxon thing. The Anglo-Saxon thing definitely drives home my point about modern day colonization, because that's just some very ancient language to be using about U.S. territories. And it kind of reminds me about how what settlers came in and talked about Native Americans. I'm like, just because their customs are different than yours and their language and their politics isn't the word I'm looking for, but their governing systems are different than yours does not mean that they are wrong. It just means you need to leave them alone.
Yep.
Well, and it's funny, they point, like, they use that precedent and they point to it and they make those kind of racist arguments. But then some of these territories have higher, a lot of them join the U.S. military and serve our country, and they have some of the most effective recruiting stations in the country.
Because there's
And
nothing else to do on those territories. If you watch this movie, it's nothing to do with politics. It's about the American Samoan soccer team. Next Goal Wins. It's like a Taika Waititi movie, but they literally talk about how there's two jobs on the island. Basically, you can either do those, or you can go to the military. They've kind of decimated these countries, and it's really screwed up.
yeah, well, it's just interesting to me, like, they, if you're gonna say that they can't understand the Constitution and U.S. laws, but yet, I think.
I honestly, this is kind of off topic, kind of on topic, but I'm surprised they gave Hawaii statehood. If that's crazy to me.
It's because they basically killed their monarchy, and that was just.
Well, that, and wasn't there a lot of settlers too? Like a lot of white settlers came in and they were demanding it.
Yeah.
If I remember history correctly. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel back to Puerto Rico. I think they should be their own country. Like their GDP would go crazy.
Absolutely.
Ideally, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was saying their GDP would go crazy because of the tourists.
Ideally, I think, the US should, every one of these territories, including Puerto Rico and Guam and everyone, they should all get a chance to have a referendum to decide if they want to become a state or not, and then like whatever, decisions are made from that, whether it's becoming a state or having their own country. Just because like I think we're at a point where it's like, Puerto Rico, for example, like they're part of the United States, but they don't have representation, so they're in this weird like middle ground. They can't really govern themselves too. Like it's a weird like place.
And
I mean, you pick one or the other.
Yeah, but honestly, that's a power grab in itself, like not giving them independence because like literally what are they doing for
Doing for
you
them.
besides you pretty much just like trapping them in politics? Like I
The
feel like
toxic marriage.
yeah, perfect words. Definitely a toxic one.
I think it's really interesting that you talked about the referendum. So I was talking to Dr. Twig about her last semester diplomacy lab and how they like wrote a policy report for Providence off the coast of Papua New Guinea and how they voted to be independent after a civil war 20 years ago and how they kind of brought back the issue and like 95% of the country wanted to be independent from Papua New Guinea. So they like there's a lot of work that goes into sovereignty. And if that is what the United States is worried about, giving up their territories, help them. Like they help other countries in those sorts of ways. Help them. Don't just kind of like use them because they're a good military resource. That's just like corrupt in and of itself.
I feel like they know if they help them though, like they're not gonna be on their side. Like they give money to like Israel and Ukraine because they're on their
Yeah.
side. They're not gonna be on their side because what have they done for them besides trap them, literally?
Exactly. Look what we've done to them. I wouldn't blame them if they hated us. And they probably
Yeah, that's
do
why
hate
they
us.
don't help Haiti. Don't get me started on that either. But yeah, like it's just a bad everything is just bad. America
Funny.
sucks.
Oops, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Funny enough, they actually did have a referendum back in 2020 with the statehood option winning by 52%. It's relatively close. 52
Puerto
to,
Rico?
yeah.
They wanted
Between
to
Yeah, but it was a non-binding thing. Like they voted, like they wanted to become a state, but said the Republican controlled the Senate. They said that they weren't going to put it up for a vote.
was it like them choosing between statehood and independence or just statehood or no statehood? Just like
The question was, should Puerto Rico be admitted immediately into the Union as a state?
Okay.
And it was yes or no.
Yeah, I know like personally, like Puerto Ricans that I know, they don't want statehood. They just want to be their own country because it pretty much is their own country at this point. Yeah. Yeah. I
All
think
right.
we
Any other points you guys? I mean, we can go back to a different question if you guys have anything else you want to add.
Oh, back to the responsibility thing. I remember, I think, I forgot what episode. Somebody had gotten like money to help with DC and its infrastructure, and he like spent it wildly or something like that. So I think that was also a reason why,
Yeah.
like, okay, no, like, what are you doing?
Why do I feel like that was episode 5 for some reason?
I feel
think-
like that was in the Hamilton episode.
Was it Shepard? Last name Shepard?
Yeah, I
think-
think so.
I wrote down like, and I kind of wanted to go back to that too, because they were saying, Congress was saying black voters in DC could not elect, good officials to be good stewards of money and be responsible, and they were using how Shepard took the money and like spent it a bunch, but then Shepard was a white man, and
Yeah.
so I just found that kind of like you're saying black voters can't be responsible, and you're using a white man who misspent money as the reason for why black like make it make sense. Like,
Yeah.
I don't get it.
Also, what was I gonna say? I think that was like the only compelling part argument about that. But what's it called? It wasn't like it was kind of contradictory, like you said. So how compelling really was it? But yeah, I mean, I feel like because they voted them in, they used that did they vote Shepard in? The black people, I guess.
Why do I feel like he was appointed or something?
Appointed. We'll see that.
I don't have it in my notes if he was appointed or elected. I can't remember.
Okay. Well, yeah. But yeah, I mean, geez.
Anna, Ethan, anything you want to add? Any question or any overall?
Let's see. I think I had something for the most compelling, like, or no, I'll just say that because I'm a bit of a cynic when it comes to politics. So I said like the biggest thing I had a hiccup on was that the DC statehood bill actually passing. I think that unless I'm mistaken, I think that is one of the bills that can be filibustered, and you need like 60 votes.
Mhm.
And yeah,
Unless they change the rules.
yeah, but
They won't.
that's if
They
they
won't.
have the courage to do that. But
Oh yeah,
I,
that was another argument too. A lot of the Democrats don't support it too, so they wouldn't
Mhm.
even get that filibuster.
yeah, so I don't see it happening anytime soon unless like a big like realignment happens. But yeah, I just think it's kind of dead in the water right now.
I feel like if the Obama realignment happened now, that would probably pass. Like where
Yeah.
the Democrats were in charge of the House, the Senate, and the presidency.
Oh yeah, if Biden had like Obama's majority, is well at least his first majority, I feel like there would be a lot more stuff happening.
Do you think does Biden support that? Do you guys think so?
I feel like if
I
he
can't
had,
recall. I don't think he put out a position on it.
He should.
Yeah.
But he's probably not because he knows at the moment it's not going to pass, so it's not worth wasting political capital talking about an issue that's not going to happen. It's a calculation, probably. Anna, any final thoughts?
Ooh.
All right, well, I think we are good to go then. Yay, last podcast, last book club, we did it.
Connor, I'll see you.
Wait,
in
wait, 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 wait,
Virginia.
wait.
Stoney.
Hold on.
Lamar Stoney dropped out of the governor's race.
Who?
Yes, I did. LeVar Stoney dropped out.
Dropped out of the governor's
He's
race.
running for lieutenant governor now.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is not related to the podcast, but
I know, sorry. I wanted to bring it up because it's so wild.
we can talk about it more in comparative politics. But anyway, all right. Bye, guys.
Bye.
See ya.
See you soon, Connor.